You ever watch an episode of Star Trek and think to yourself, wow, this is really boring? Because there doesn't seem to be anything going on. Sure, Odo's stuck in an elevator with Diana Troy's mom, and the station seems to be powering down one system at a time, but the whole thing seems passive, like it has no energy. You know, people are calmly talking about solving a problem using pseudoscience mumbo-jumbo, and we know the problem will be solved by some ex machina by the end of the episode, but the real meat is in that Odo story. Why is he afraid of turning into liquid in the elevator? Is there some physiological reason he must be in his pail at the end of the day? Like, could he die? Turns out no. No, he's just shy about doing that in front of people, apparently. Even though he has done it plenty of times in the past and didn't seem to care then, it's deflating, seems artificial. It resolves any tension we might have been feeling when Troy's mom just catches Odo in her friggin' shirt. This is a non-conflict. I've had this experience with this show many times, and I think it boils down to what you like. For me, the most interesting thing about a show, a movie, or a book is the interpersonal conflicts. The misunderstandings that people have, and how in general we must all pussyfoot around delicate topics at times, and fail utterly at doing so. Embarrassment, guilt, shame, anger, and fear are very strong drivers of conflict in nearly any story, but Star Trek lacked these things quite often. At least in the very early seasons. It had other things going for it, though, like problem solving, teamwork, things like that, but the conflict was always outside of the team, and therefore, the characters never really felt real to me. They were too passive. Now, take these two sentences for example. Sentence 1. I started to run, but I was hit by a tree branch. And sentence 2. I ran straight into a tree branch. Which one sounds better to you? Which one seems more active? The sentence that is all wishy-washy and can't seem to commit to the idea of running, or the sentence that not only commits to running, but also takes full credit for running into that friggin' branch? Passivity is rarely a trait we value in the media we consume. Yet some artists, especially those who are not yet confident in their abilities, fall into the trap of passivity. So let's get to the point and dig in, shall we? First, I want to start with a quote. Passive pleasure is no pleasure at all. This quote is attributed to the Russian playwright Arthur Adamov. Adamov was a proponent and some call leader of the absurdist fiction movement called the theater of the absurd, which arose, some say, in large part due to the confusion and destruction of the aftermath of World War II. Adamov is in good company with writers like Albert Camus, one of my personal favorites, but unlike Camus, is relatively unknown for his work outside of Europe. Ironically, the man who thought passive pleasure was in fact not pleasurable accidentally committed suicide from an overdose of barbiturates. Mass Effect Andromeda is much like a barbiturate in that it can lull you to sleep with a passive and sometimes absurd experience. First, let's start with the dialogue system. The dialogue system is a lot like Mass Effect 3 in the way that it does mostly auto dialogue and makes you feel like Ryder isn't in your control most of the time. I've gone into this at length in Mass Effect 3 video, but let's talk a little bit about what they changed in a long period between the two games. The first thing that's changed is the Renegade and Paragon system. In the original Mass Effect series, there was very little choice when speaking to people and how you react to how they react to you. You were either a diplomat or you were hostile, essentially. It had a little more nuance in that at times, but if you've played the game, you know what I mean. Choosing Paragon or Renegade choices netted you points in either attitude and determined what options in dialogue were open to you later. Certain key decisions were also labeled by the Renegade and Paragon system, and these decisions usually gave the illusion of affecting the galaxy in a massive way. And sure, it was an illusion, but up until Mass Effect 3, the illusion was a pretty good one. You really felt like you were doing something, shaping the affairs of an entire galaxy with the click of a button. You felt empowered and powerful, but the system was far from perfect and went through many mutations each game. The evolution it went through in Andromeda is, well, it died. It doesn't exist anymore. It was replaced by something that should have been more nuanced, especially by this description. Let's look at our new choices. There's emotional. Ryder will typically respond emotionally with anger, sympathy, or passion. By this description, it sounds like someone who really cares deeply for people. It may also be a little irrational.
I suppose it is a rather darkly beautiful phenomenon.
Logical. Ryder is a Vulcan, pragmatic and rational. He likes to think through his decisions and do whatever makes the most logical sense. Sounds like Ryder might be a cold and calculating kind of guy with this type of personality.
It's dangerous, and that's all I see. A mass of destructive, malevolent tentacles.
And then there's casual. See, Ryder is aloof, generally unconcerned with what's happening in the moment. Basically, this is made to sound like the sarcastic choices in Fallout 4. If well written, these choices could be a good way to diffuse tension in certain situations.
If everything was set in place by some mysterious creator, why even be a scientist?
Oh my god, that was so funny!
Professional. Ryder is very formal in this mode. He focuses on getting the job done and all the formalities that entail the life of service. You ever see Stripes, the officer that always demands that people salute him? Sounds like what this guy would be like, but maybe less incompetent? We can only hope.
You are welcome to your beliefs. It's good to have different voices on the team.
These choices sound like they would open the game up for a lot of role-playing opportunities, and they sound like a lot of fun to experiment around with, but the problem is, all of these lines are delivered in a dispassionate, sarcastic, tension-diffusing sort of way that makes any situation, no matter what it entails, seem less urgent. To make things worse, the auto-dialogue at times is egregious, and Ryder's default mode seems to be set to Guardians of the Galaxy. Did you want to play a logical character? Too bad. Have a terribly awkward attempt at humor. Want to play something cold and calculating? Nope, your character buckles like a belt under pressure. The role-playing aspect of this game is kind of non-existent. There's hardly anything in the way of interpersonal conflict in this game. The crew, for the most part, are okay with you. An inexperienced defrostee with an attitude that screams, "What do I do? I was never taught this stuff. Somebody please help me. Are you mad at me? Can I do anything to make you, maybe, I don't know, not mad at me? Are you sure you're not mad at me? Because it seems like you are. Are you sure? Like, because, you know, I'm asking if you're mad. I mean, I'll stop asking then, okay? How about that? But seriously, are you? Are you still mad at me?"
The captain just called me Pathfinder. This is really happening. Just take a deep breath.
What white nonsense is this?
Where do I start? I'm just not sure I'm ready.
No, why?
We weren't ready to fall out of the sky on Habitat 7, but we survived that.
Right. So, always keep a jump jet handy.
Ryder is... he's a pussy. I mean, I don't know how else to say this, but the guy is unsure of himself, doesn't know how to make a decision and seem confident while doing it, and the crew responds back in a way that seems, at times, disrespectful, like they know he's incompetent and they don't care if he knows it, and he rarely ever reacts to it. Now, I understand that this kid is new to all this. He wasn't expecting to be a Pathfinder and was expecting to learn it all from his father, and honestly, you know, his attitude makes a lot of sense when viewing it from that angle, but it doesn't matter if it makes sense. It matters whether or not it's fun to play as a wishy-washy protagonist that's constantly unsure of himself and can't seem to commit to an idea. Take the "my face hurts" conversation. Oh my god, are we tired of talking about this yet? Take the "my face hurts" conversation for a great example of how this guy is a complete pushover.
Excuse me, Director Addison.
Ryder?
It's Pathfinder.
Ryder. That's what you're up against. Why people won't trust you. Why I don't trust you. Prove me wrong.
Bitch, are you for real?
I am going to compare this game to the original trilogy a lot because BioWare called it Mass Effect, not me. If somebody had said this to Shepard and disrespected him like that, there's a really good chance he'd have yoked her up by her collar and told her to watch how she behaved. I mean, shit, he might even slap her around a bit like, you know, Humphrey Bogart. Point is, Shepard didn't take shit from anyone if you wanted to play him that way. And in Andromeda, everything from the choices you have in dialogue to the way your character is animated screams, "Please don't be mad at me, I'm trying my best." This is mainly the fault of the auto dialogue because this is when it happens the most. Or in the branching dialogue bits. In Andromeda, branching dialogue means you have two choices, left or right. It usually signifies the end of one section of dialogue, meaning that once you pick this choice, there's no going back. So you can't like investigate or anything like that. This is like the point of no return. These choices are literally no different in tone from the other choices. The only difference is that there's only 2 choices, and you can't really tell whether or not you're going to be sarcastic or you're going to be a dick in any of these. I can't tell you how many times I picked a choice hoping that Ryder would stand up for himself and maybe show some backbone, only for him to say some stupid ass joke that isn't remotely funny that diffuses any tension that scene might have been ramping up to. Or even worse, he responds in a way that makes him seem like he doesn't want to be pushed around, but also doesn't want people to not like him. You know, it's fun to play as someone with low self-esteem, isn't it? Take this conversation with Addison as she asks us what happened to her father, and we get 2 choices of how to respond. One emotional and one logical. Each choice elicits a different response from the character we were talking to, which is normally a good thing. The problem here is that it's undercut by the fact that no matter what we choose, the end result is the same. Our response does not soften or harden her opinion of us. She is unchanged. It's even worse because Addison serves literally no purpose in the game. She is essentially a toothless dog. She doesn't trust us, and that doesn't matter at all, because the Solarian director gives us the keys to a brand new ship anyway, no questions asked. She's just a terminal for dumping dialogue on us, and a bit of information. She is an information kiosk, posing as a person, essentially. This could have been handled so differently, as in, she could have been a gatekeeper to the next story mission, and unless we could convince her of our trustworthiness, we wouldn't be getting what we want, which would have been keys to a brand new spaceship. This could have been a branching quest where we either side with her because she is less shady and do a mission around the Nexus to gain her trust or something like that, or we go behind her back and talk to the Solarian, who is clearly trying a power play to oust her. That would have felt like a choice. Instead, the game is leading us by the hand through a series of constructed events, hoping we won't get lost on the way. So many of the conversations leading up to missions go this way. Take the Angaran we talked to on Vold, who also doesn't trust us, yet trusts that we will rescue her supposed important prisoners. It doesn't matter that she doesn't trust us, she is just manufacturing conflict to give the player a false sense of opposition. And Ryder, he just takes it all with a sort of grace and dignity that's just really annoying. Take this conversation.
Maybe we can get them back on our side.
We know they can fight Ket.
Our supplier's waiting. Come on, we're gonna be late.
Do I even want to know?
Nope.
I don't understand what you're trying to tell me here, game. Am I supposed to take this story seriously? Like, okay, am I supposed to take Ryder seriously? I mean, he doesn't have control over his crew, and doesn't even seem the least bit phased that they might be using his ship to smuggle.
You got a problem with that? You can join these assholes. What was that?
Nothing. I'll be on my way.
Creep.
I don't know if I even need to say this, but I will. Do you think Shepard would have taken that ship from literally anyone?
Hey, I didn't say dismissed or meeting adjourned or anything. Meeting adjourned. As you were.
You don't scare me! Work on it! Sir, yes, sir!
I look at it like this. See, Shepard is like Clint Eastwood, or James Bond, depending on how you played. Ryder is like a less fun Nathan Drake or recently deceased Natalie Wood. And you know what? I honestly think that's what the dev team was going for. If you had a choice between 2 frameworks to tell your story, dark and gritty, or bright and hopeful, and the story you were trying to tell was about space pilgrims settling a new land, which would you choose? I personally would go with dark and gritty because, well, it just fits. I mean, colonizers rarely were good people, and general displacement of natives and genocide were pretty popular tools of clearing up space on all that prime real estate. But if your inspiration's coming from, say, I don't know, Star Trek? You'd have to go to the bright and hopeful way of things. That means a sort of utopian ideal. In order for Krogans, Solarians, Asari, and Turians to travel across space for 600 years, a certain level of trust must have been achieved, or the whole project would have failed before it even launched. The Andromeda initiative launches roughly around the same time that Mass Effect 2 takes place, which makes this a difficult chasm to logic leap over. Knowing this, we have a couple of plot inconveniences we either need to explain away or we need to suspend our disbelief. Doing the latter is a little difficult, but the former could be explained pretty conveniently. If this were a dark and gritty setting, that is. Fact is, humans are known to travel to places they are unwelcome, like the Traverse. The story should have been that just humans went with their arcs, which is a really heavy-handed name by the way, and set out to find new colonies. It would have made a lot of sense. Then, instead of the same old tired cast of alien races, we could have spent this new game getting to know new races, with different problems, in different landscapes. A true adventure. The problem is, in a bright and hopeful setting, we must suspend our disbelief. But we cannot suspend our disbelief because of the baggage that the old universe brings with it, in the form of Krogan, Turians, and Asaris. See, with the tension between Krogan and the Council, and with the Council still not fully trusting humans, it is kind of hard to believe that the Krogan, which are already under the yoke of the Genophage, and barely able to sustain their population, would allow so many of their own to go off on a trip around the universe with races they consider enemies. Or that they would get along at all, and wouldn't be at each other's throats the entire time. So in order to buy this premise, we must turn off our brains and just go with it, as Ryder says. The story becomes even more passive in that when you go to the first planet, you realize it's uninhabitable. The reason has nothing to do with you, and has something to do with ancient tech that terraforms planets, apparently. That's been there all along. So I want you to think about this. We have a game that tells us that we went 600 years away from home to a planet we hoped to terraform that already had terraformers there, and all we needed to do is turn them back on? So we race from planet to planet in this game, flipping switches before the Ket can. That is, I shit you not, the story. The theme of the story, which could have been enterprising and inspiring, is completely undercut by how we achieve our goals. We flip a switch and bam, magic terraforming. It's so convenient that some might call it a plot contrivance. The first 5 or so hours of gameplay in this game are the most painful, linear, passive experiences I have ever had the displeasure to play through. But after this, the story opens up a little bit and the game becomes basically Dragon Age Inquisition in space. More on that in the gameplay section. Now think about what this game could have been. Explorers find a new home on a planet far, far away, and everything seems to be going good until they meet the natives of the planet. While terraforming the planet to fit our needs, we find that this is having a negative effect on the people who already live there, and we must either engage them diplomatically, or commit what is essentially genocide to save our own race. All the while, Ket raiding parties are hitting our outposts, and we're either fighting a war on 2 fronts, or gathering allies to fight the true enemy. This would have made a hell of a lot more sense in a plot that deflates itself with plot contrivances and a bad guy of the week storyline. And, most importantly, it would have lived up to the Mass Effect namesake in that our decisions would be affecting the galaxy as a whole instead of turning on a bunch of space hoovers. The main story missions are serviceable in this game, but what they service is a limp noodle of a story. The brunt of gameplay, however, doesn't come from that main story, but instead derives from boring aerial traversal quests, Sudoku puzzles, camp clearing mechanics, and fetch quests. This is so frustrating because the theme of the story is colonization, but for the largest part of the game, you're not doing anything related to that goal. Simply put, you raise a meter of viability for the galaxy, very similar to the power levels to open up story missions in Inquisition. To max out a planet's viability, you do things like side missions. Only certain missions will grant viability, which makes sense, but the way they use this idea doesn't make any sense at all. For instance, just landing on Eos grants you 2% planet viability. Why? Then when you activate monoliths, whose only purpose is to show you the way to the vault, you are granted 5% planet viability. Again, why? These things are just fancy triangulation devices. How does this make the planet a better place to live when it only finds one thing, the vault? I can understand activating the vault because that starts lowering the radiation on Eos, but the rest? That makes 0 sense. Take the mission Staging a Rescue. This mission grants you a 5% planet viability on Vold for releasing like 4 Angarans from a camp who have data confirming the existence of an AI. Why does something that confirms the existence of an AI raise the viability of a planet that is essentially a big ball of ice and wind? Okay, maybe that's not convincing. Sure, it is conceivable that freeing them could help the resistance in some weird way, thus help survivability of the planet just in terms of the cat. Fine. Maybe my definition is too narrow. How about being rewarded for going into a crashed starship on a Krogan world to find a drive core, and then finding out that it was already stolen and being rewarded viability for that? How is allowing someone access to something that could possibly blow up a whole lot of stuff contribute to the viability of the planet? Essentially, planet viability is a number to chase. A fake way of tracking your progress as you check things off of a list. But keep in mind that none of these activities have anything to do with setting up a colony. The passive part of this is that you, the player, aren't doing anything to achieve so many of these milestones aside from getting in the Mako 2.0 and driving from one side of the planet to the next in what is some of the most tedious backtracking imaginable. Also, so you can check off things off of a list and make a number go higher. It's passive, but worst of all, it's shallow. Let's go back to my previous story idea, for instance. We have 5 arcs, 1 for each race, and 5 planets, again, 1 for each. We, the player, must decide which planet each race goes to, depending on their physiological needs and temperament. Let's say that 4 of them are inhabited, and only 1 of them is inhabited by non-intelligent animals. Now, each planet that is inhabited is a challenge. Do the Asari prefer a diplomatic approach? Why, most certainly yes, but we, the player, decide if that's going to happen or not. Diplomacy requires a give and take. They need things from us, and we need things like land in return. Or we could just take it all by force. I mean, this is a decision we are making, and the game reacts to our decisions. Or it would have if this was the game, which it isn't, that they made. I mean, my god, why am I doing this? Like, this is like fan fiction in essay form. In Andromeda, meanwhile, our diplomacy is our only choice, and it is the way to funnel us down a linear path to a singular goal. Compare this to Gothic 3. Gothic 3 was kind of a shit show. Terrible combat, buggy as hell, but oh my god, was the theme of this game great. See, here's the idea, right? There are about 6 factions spread out over 3 halves of a continent. In each half, 2 of those factions are at war. You have to decide which faction you side with on a town-by-town basis, and either do missions for them, or wipe them out completely and let the new owners move in. This is what I had hoped Andromeda would be. Imagine landing on a planet and establishing a base. And as you're building, the neighbors come knocking, wondering who you are and what you're doing. But they don't speak your language, so the negotiations are tense, with neither side on knowing what one another's motivations are. As a sign of goodwill, you could build them a water purifier, or, as an act of sabotage, build a facility that poisons their water supply, making them easy to take over, or settle the Krogan on the planet and pillage and burn down every primitive village on that planet. Something like that would have not only fit the theme of colonization, but it also would have lived up to the Mass Effect name. In this scenario, it would have been easy to fake the illusion of impact. When I heard about Andromeda for the first time before I started working at EA, I figured it was going to be a shooter, city building hybrid, something like that. Something that would combine an RPG with civilization building. I started off very excited for it, but as videos emerged and those first impression videos started rolling out, I mourned the loss of what could have been before the game ever was. The game gives you brief glimpses of the sim aspects that are either not fully fleshed out or were scraped because of time limitations in a development cycle. For instance, AVP goes towards opening cryopods containing people with certain kinds of skills. Looking at this from a civilization building sim, these people would be similar to what they are in Andromeda: science, military, and merchants. In a Civ game, these pods would provide either bonuses to certain acquisition rates of resources, and perhaps make certain tasks like research, building, or soldier training quicker or cheaper, adding real value to whatever your civilization is focusing on. In Andromeda, they give you bonuses like crafting supplies, XP bonuses, equipment slots, stuff like that. The problem I have with this is that it's all feeding into the combat loop and not the planet viability loop, because that loop doesn't really exist at all. That's the basic do quest, watch number go up loop. The effect of all this is that you feel like the viability of the planet is going up kind of passively, that you go on seemingly unrelated missions and through no effort of your own, the planet becomes less hostile to life. Dialogue has this effect, your choices, which don't exist, have this effect, even the quests have this effect. Mass Effect Andromeda occasionally gives you options on how you finish a mission, but these choices never really feel like choices, to be honest. Let's look at the end of A Trail of Hope for an example of what the end of these missions look like. At the end of this mission, you have a choice to make. Do you either side with Jaal or the Moshae? The Moshae wants you to blow up the facility with all the Angarans inside of it, which is ridiculous, but I'll go into that in a moment. Jaal wants you to free the prisoners. This is the only logical choice because your whole reason for coming here is to get in the good graces of the Angaran people, and blowing up a facility full of their people doesn't sound like a great way to get them on your side. The problem is twofold. This feels like a non-choice because one choice is kind of a stupid choice and the other is the only one that makes sense, but also, why can't we do both? I mean, we don't physically go down inside the facility and free the Angarans. They make it out on their own. And the reinforcements don't arrive until everyone has escaped and we evac out on a shuttle. So why couldn't we blow up the place after evacuation? Because this is an artificial choice. You would think that maybe by not blowing up the facility that the Moshae would refuse to support us because there has to be some sort of consequence, but nope. In fact, the opposite happens. We get support from the Angarans on our final mission. If we blow up the facility, as the Moshae asked, we don't receive any support at the end of the game. The game can't even follow its own logic. The next example, which is a prime example of a meaningless artificial choice, is in the mission Hunting the Archon. You get a choice to either save the Krogans or the Solarians. No matter who you choose, you will face one or the other in battle. Which is ridiculous because we saved the Solarian Ark. Where did the Archon find all of the Solarians he needed to make an army of them? Can he exalt dead bodies now? I mean, it is implied that if we save the Krogan, we're leaving the Solarian Pathfinder to die, for some reason. The Krogan makes sense to me, but the Solarians, it just feels artificial. I think the reason these choices feel artificial is in how backward the outcome of them are, and how they seem like they come from out of nowhere. That Solarian shouldn't have even been on this ship, yet still was. The biggest issue is that none of these choices have any weight to them. Alright, I hate to use the Rachni Queen example again. Alright, so I won't. So let's see, what other choices were there in Mass Effect 1? Alright, there was that thing with Annaleus, but that wasn't really impactful. I mean, it was well designed, but not exactly a difficult choice. Okay, wait. No. Oh, shit. God, there really wasn't a lot of mind-shattering choices in Mass Effect 1 now that I'm thinking about it. Alright, so, remember the Rachni Queen? That mission had impact because each choice had potential consequences. You were either destroying an entire race of life or releasing a potentially dangerous enemy that could wipe out all other forms of life in the galaxy. That is a hard choice. Oh, you know what? How about The Witcher 3? Either allow the tree monster to escape its bonds and hope that it will live up to its word, or kill it to be safe. Every choice in The Witcher 3 was difficult for me, because I didn't know what was going to happen if I picked one choice over the other, yet I should have. I always knew that each choice would have its downsides because that game trained me to know that. It also followed its own internal logic. If I let the tree monster go, it saves the kids, but wipes out a village, and the Red Baron's wife is turned into a hag because, well, you know, these are the consequences, and they make sense because we betrayed the witches, and as a result, they betrayed us. If I killed it, the witches take the kids, likely eating them, but they leave the Baron's wife, as promised. They're to their word. They were to their word. Each choice had a meaningful consequence. That is, you know, as I pointed out before, not the case with Andromeda. The choices are artificial and meaningless. So in closing, the whole experience is, on average, just average. It is average because there's no passion here. There seems to be a ton of content slapped together here without any trace of the passion that a designer has when they design something that they love. You know, when they're trudging through it, it uses a lot of passive language and everything's very passive and nothing active is happening and you don't feel like you're in charge. Nothing about this game feels like a passion project, which is exactly the opposite of how Mass Effect 1 came to be. It was somebody's baby at first. It came from the inspiration that someone felt over movies and books that influenced who they were and why they got into writing in the first place. When an artist is passionate about their work, it shows. And when they're phoning it in, well, that shows as well. This has been a rant from Strat-Edgy, and now that you heard it, go play some games.